Welcome to an hour of provocative and timely conversation on the most important topics of the day. This program is for critical thinkers. And now, here's your host, integrated media professor, longtime Spokane talk radio personality, and award-winning broadcast veteran, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Hey, welcome to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. There's an awful lot on our plate today. There's a lot of things happening in our world that require significant thought these days, and not enough thought is going into them. I'm going to talk today about Black Lives Matter. I'm going to talk today about the need to lift all the restrictions, and right now on COVID-19, especially in Spokane County. I'm going to talk about the CHOP. That's the Capitol Hill organized protest that has become a little nation unto itself. Blocks of the Capitol Hill area of the city of Seattle. I want to talk about the Rayshard Brooks shooting in Atlanta, comparing that to the George Floyd homicide in Minneapolis. I want to talk about the Trump rally coming up on Saturday, specifically not that it is coming up, but the hypocrisy that surrounds this whole process. And I want to talk about the polls that say Biden leads Trump in the possibility of winning the election in November. It's an awful lot of stuff that makes you go, yeah, let's see. Is that right? Could that possibly be true? And the answer to it is no. If it looks too good to be true, or if you smell a rat, it's probably not too good to be true, and there probably is a rat in the pile someplace. Let's begin with Black Lives Matters. Now, let's first of all understand some things. This may not, by the way, be popular with some of the folks who might view this, and I really am not interested in whether it's popular with them or not. Critical thinkers get to the truth, and they understand that the truth and facts are sticky little problems for some folks who would rather interpret them and give their own version of them. So let's look at what's going on here. First of all, is there anyone really, realistically, in their heart of hearts who believe that black lives don't matter? Is there anybody who actually is of a mind that black people are subhuman or whatever, are not entitled to the rights that exist for the rest of us here in these United States? I don't think anybody does. Now, I'm not going to say nobody, because there are lunatics in all portions of the spectrum out there, political spectrum and philosophical spectrum, so there probably are some goofy people who may think that, but they don't represent anywhere near America at all. Let's understand that black lives do matter, but they don't matter any more than white lives or Asian lives or Native American lives or whatever. Human beings are entitled to a recognition of integrity just for being human. It's inherent in their nature. And that matters. And our founders came to the conclusion that that matters and designed a system for all of us to live under that recognized the inherent value of humankind. Now, you say, but they owned some slaves back then. I know that is the case. There's no question about that. But the reality of it is that we have, since that time, evolved to within a complete understanding of the fact that all lives matter. We know that. But we're giving black lives something of a superior position of late. And that's because we're afraid. We don't need to be afraid, but we are. There's an awful lot of bowing to the force of the mob these days that doesn't enhance the value of black lives at all. Black lives matter, no question about it. I believe it, you believe it. But Black Lives Matter, the organization, that's another story altogether. All right? That is another story altogether. It found its genesis in the shooting incident involving Michael Brown. You remember Michael Brown? Ferguson, Missouri? A few years back, he tussled with a police officer and was shot and killed. Black Lives Matter more or less emerged shortly after that period of time with a slogan a slogan that was predicated on total fiction, a slogan you've seen many a time and heard many a time. Hands up, don't shoot. The theory being that Michael Brown was surrendering to the police officer Darren Wilson at the time, and that in the process of surrendering, he was shot and killed by a white police officer because white police officers have it in for black persons, and they will shoot and kill any of them whenever they get a chance. That's been the theory that's been promulgated by Black Lives Matter ever since. And that theory is false and ridiculous. Absolutely not supported at all by any statistics that reasonable person, that critical thinkers could accept. Not at all. So the stand up or hands up, don't shoot concept. We saw that in parades, even when they were talking about pigs in a blanket, killing cops, all that sort of thing. Remember the slogans that we heard in the year or two after that, and we still continue to hear now. ACAB, the signs that you see at protests these days. All cops are bastards. That's the theory, all right? And they have attempted to sell that concept based on a false presumption. Michael Brown did not surrender. He was not on his knees. He did not have his hands up. He was lunging at Officer Wilson with the intent of killing him. And he was shot in self-defense. The grand jury in St. Louis County came to that conclusion in Ferguson. The federal government Justice Department's investigation, which was started by the insistence of Barack Obama, concluded the very same thing. Two major newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, independently sent investigators to try to disprove what the others had said about what happened actually there, and all of them came to the same conclusion. That was a justifiable homicide. That was an officer in self-defense. His career was ruined over the whole process, but Black Lives Matter was launched over the whole process, and they continue to use terrorist tactics to push their agenda. And unfortunately, they have frightened corporate America. They have frightened political America in some of the major cities of the United States to the degree that they haven't got the guts to stand up to them. They're frightened about what might happen. And what might happen, obviously, we've seen what might happen. The riots, the destruction of downtown areas, the looting of businesses, the torching of independent private properties and owners, even black owners losing their livelihoods, losing their businesses. This is not about whether or not black lives have value. This is about pushing a political agenda by a mob mentality, which is fundamentally un-American. Fundamentally un-American. Now, whatever we're talking about here, if you want to get in on this is how you do it. We have an opportunity for you to join me on the program and talk about things that you would like to talk about. Keep them topical with what we're talking about, though. Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. That's who you get a hold of, and he will give you an access code so that you can get on the air. And I'd love to have you join us, and we can talk about this. So I want you to be suspicious about Black Lives Matter. Now, I know that's not popular to do because everybody and their dog are basically trying to say, oh, yeah, Black Lives Matter, we're with you, we're with you, we're with you. But what are they doing? Are they genuinely believing that, or are they basically attempting to keep their business from burning? I mean, be realistic about this. Right? Now, I'm not suggesting that there isn't racism in the United States, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that the idea of obliterating racism in the U.S. isn't a good idea, a noble idea, and an idea whose time has long since come. But this isn't the way to do it. That's what I'm telling you. This is not the way to do it. I'll leave that on the table then for you critical thinkers to think about. Second item, let's lift all COVID-19 restrictions. I've looked at what's been going on in Spokane. I'm happy that I don't live there. I live in North Idaho, and our state is open. You can go to church here. You can go to a bar. You can go to a restaurant. There are no restrictions. And guess what? We also have some of the lowest COVID-19 statistics in the entire country. So I have begun to lose faith entirely in the models which have never been credible and have never been fair and never been right. And I think the science is not credible. I think it's fatally flawed, even in Spokane County. And I have a serious problem with an unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat deciding when you can save your life's investment in your business in Spokane County. This is ludicrous. This is not the way it's supposed to be. The time has come to dump it. I mean, let's be realistic about some things. They have seriously politicized this coronavirus. Hypocrisy reigns these days. I mean, look at it. Riots and street demonstrations, those are okay. Going to church on Sunday? Oh, that's dangerous. I mean, stop and think about that. Is this about science or is this about politics? I can tell you this. There may have been an attempt, I have some serious doubts as to how genuine it was, but there may have been an attempt at one time to make this about science. But ever since we went to this particular, well, those guys out there with no masks on, shoulder to shoulder, not socially distancing and all that sort of thing, they're off after a noble cause. And so it's okay for them to do what they do. But oh my goodness, worshiping the God above, oh, you can't do that. That's dangerous. You can't do that. Stop already. Critical thinkers know what fraud that is. And it's now time to just simply say, throw off the wraps here. I realize there's a risk. The risk is a manageable risk. We were wrong about all the things we thought were going to happen with respect to coronavirus in the country and certainly in our region. And it's time to simply say, look, go back to work. Sure, social distance, that's important. Wear a mask if you feel you must. Even if the business decides that they want all their employees to wear a mask, that's okay. But the bottom line is staying closed down for an extra 10 or 12 cases in a given week or a given month is ludicrous. It's ridiculous. And the cost, the economic harm cost associated with these closures, these lockdowns and what have you are just plain not worth it. I know you say, well, but there are 200,000 people have died in the United States. Yeah, I understand that. And a good 50 to 60,000 of them are at the hands of political leaders who were stupid as a mud fence and made some serious errors that resulted in the death, almost criminal acts in my opinion. The rest of us have, to one or a greater extent, managed to go through life pretty well unaffected by this process, and we know in all the level, this isn't going to be any more dangerous in the end than common flu has been. We just didn't understand the properties at one point. We were afraid and we were willing to abide by whatever they told us. But whatever they told us turned out to be wrong again and again and again and again. And when you find out that somebody like the venerable Dr. Fauci has an interest, an economic interest in the outcome of a set of vaccine investigations that are going on, when you find that out, and that he badmouths other possibilities, and that he tells us things that are just simply not so. Tells us, well, I don't think we should start school in the fall. Oh, that's going to be too dangerous. Critical thinkers, I'm appealing to you. There aren't enough of you engaged. Critical thinkers, please do this, will you? Look at the facts and ask yourself, does this add up? Does this add up? Not only that, but the economic harm is joined by health harm with respect to the way we're practicing in this process. There are an awful lot of serious health issues associated with destroying an individual's livelihood, placing them in such uncertainty for months on end. There's been a rise in alcoholism. There's been a rise in suicide. And we don't just count COVID deaths. We've got to count deaths related to the entire incident, and some of those things are not COVID. And now we're finding out that they've been overstating the COVID deaths, the actual physical COVID deaths. There's a difference between dying of COVID and dying with COVID. They had an individual in a Midwestern city who jumped out of a 6-story apartment house window, died in the alley below. He happened to have COVID, but COVID didn't kill him. It was that sudden stop on the concrete. And he's a COVID death statistic. Now that's pretty stark. And that's pretty clear that somebody's pulling the wool over your eyes with a deal like that. There are a lot more subtle ones that are occurring as well. And we need to be critically thoughtful about them. Going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about CHOP, the Capitol Hill organized protests. Talk about peaceful protests. Talk about occupation. Talk about hypocrisy. Give me a break. Give me a break. Critical thinkers know when their leg is being pulled. Once again, here's how you can contact us and be a part of the program. Let's put that up. Vinny at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Dial that one up. Get a hold of Vinny, and he'll give you a access code so that you can get into the program today. All right? Let's take a little time out. We'll be right back with more on For Critical Thinkers.
As a community, you've always risen to the occasion. And at Wendell Motors, we want to help you continue that in whatever way we can. We're here to lend you a hand with 0% financing for 84 months and no payments for 90 days on 2020 and 2019 Fords. Unheard of financing on the F-150, Edge, Explorer, Ranger, and more. Our trained staff is following all CDC guidelines. We will deliver the vehicle to you and make the process as seamless as possible. Call us today or visit us online at wendell.com.
I'm former Washington State Representative Leonard Christian, and since I left office, the budget has almost doubled, and the governor signed comprehensive K-12 sex education into law. He's also abused his emergency powers. I'm asking for your support to help me return to Olympia so that I can protect businesses and families. I'm Leonard Christian, the reasonable right candidate, and I ask for your vote.
Paid for by Leonard Christian for State Representative, Republican.
Welcome back to the program. Let's talk about CHOP, Capitol Hill Organized Protest. Now, that's a new name. It was first CHAZ, as you know, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. But they changed that, all right? And they changed that for a variety of reasons, one of which changed the way in which the law enforced against them might possibly be handled. And so they wisely decided to change their name, although I don't know that I've seen any evidence that they've changed what they're all about, and that still is more important than their name. Mayor Jenny Durkin of Seattle is a Lulu, no question about it. Unbelievably incompetent. She calls these people peaceful protesters. She even suggested that this is going to be a summer of love. Remember? She didn't do anything about it. The police precinct on Capitol Hill, on 12th Avenue, very familiar with that area, having originally grown up in Seattle and gone to school on Capitol Hill. I'm well aware of what that area is. There are a mix of businesses as well as a number of private residences and homes, all of which are affected negatively by this occupation. And Jenny Durkin called this peaceful protester. Now, let me understand something here, and you must as well if you're a critical thinker. There is no peaceful protest unless the protest is, in fact, lawful. And this protest at that location under these circumstances is not lawful. This isn't a traditional forum for assembly and redress of grievance. You don't barricade yourself into these sorts of things. Remember, not too long ago, the left particularly was on the exact opposite side of this sort of issue. You remember back in January of 2016, when 26 militants were indicted for federal felonies for occupying the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Harney, Oregon. Remember that? About 30 miles out of Burns, Oregon. Remember that situation? All the world watched, and everybody and their dog on the left was screaming and yelling that this is ridiculous. You can't occupy government property. You can't occupy private property. You can't close roads just because you want to make it. But you can't do that. And isn't this the same thing? These folks have put up concrete barriers. They're preventing people from entering. They have armed guards at their entry points. Some folks can get through if they say the right things or are trusted, but the others cannot. This is an unlawful occupation. They are creating a interference with commerce. Businesses can't function and operate. They are shaking some of them down to provide protection for them if they don't pay off. They are frightening a lot of individuals who live there, keeping them from medical appointments, keeping them from coming and going as they are free to do under the law. And they turn to the police and say, what are you going to do about it? And the answer is nothing. Not going to do anything about it. The mayor thinks this is a summer of love. Why, these are just a bunch of nice kids who are just letting off a little bit of steam. It can't be both ways. It just simply cannot be. The fact that Mayor Jenny Durkan is gutless, the fact that the governor of the state of Washington, the president called him a stiff. He actually is intelligent enough to be a stiff. You ever see the TV show? It was back, I don't know how many years ago, several years back, but it was called Coach. Craig T. Nelson, who was a Spokenite, played the part of a Minnesota University football coach. And he had an assistant whose name was Dauber. Dauber was big and tall and dumber than a mud fence. And he was Jay Inslee to the T. I mean, Inslee, unfortunately, hasn't got the good sense it takes to be an even-handed governor. He is a zealot. He is a left-wing lunatic. And he is allowing things to happen in Seattle that no governor of any state should allow to happen in its major cities or minor cities for that matter. The occupation of that territory in Seattle is a crime. Nothing else matters. It's a crime. It's got to be cleaned up. It's got to be cleaned up right away. But the problem with it is that now, as the Seattle authorities are pointing the fingers at each other, the chief of police, Carmen Best in Seattle, said that she wasn't the one who called the officers away from the precinct that is now boarded up in that same location as CHOP now calls it their, I don't know, the People's Precinct building or whatever it's called. In any event, she says she didn't call the cops off. She didn't tell them to abandon. Jenny Durkan says she didn't call them to abandon. Look at this. Here you have the leaders of the major city in the state of Washington pointing the fingers at each other and basically ducking any kind of liability or responsibility for what is happening. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. And yet, this could go on for days and days and days. What happens, however, is that they're going to run out of supplies after a while, right? There are already some fights inside there. There have been some attacks. There's been some sexual assaults. There have been a number of different things. This is not exactly a surprise. This is exactly what happened with Occupy Wall Street in New York, remember? And then Mayor Michael Bloomberg finally went in and said, look, sorry, we can't do this anymore. Sent in the authorities, and they cleaned it up. That's what's going to have to happen in Seattle. And I have a feeling that this isn't going to come to a good end. I have a feeling that this could be an ugly scene by the time this comes apart. And it will come apart. It's inevitable that it will. How about the Atlanta shooting of Rayshard Brooks? Have you seen the footage of that? He is asleep, passed out, in fact, having had too much to drink, in his car, in the drive-up window line at a Wendy's fast food restaurant. The call goes out that he's blocking the line. People can't get his attention. He's got the windows up, the doors locked, and he's passed out. Police show up. They finally make contact with him, bring him out of the car. They spend about 25, 30 minutes, even more than that, by some accounts, having a chat with him about what's going on, asking him where he'd been, how much he had to drink. They were perfectly calm. He was calm. They gave him a breathalyzer test, and the breathalyzer test revealed that he was way over the legal limit, and he was behind the wheel of a car. That constitutes, under the law of Georgia and under the law of Washington, Idaho, wherever, that constitutes a DUI, driving under the influence. And when they determined that, they tried to put him under arrest. They handcuffed him, and in the process of handcuffing him, he started to fight back. And he's a powerful man. Broke through the around a bit. He finally got a hold of a taser that one of the officers had. He pulled the taser and he shot the officer with it. The officer, we're now told, fell to the ground and suffered a concussion in the process. The man took off, Brooks did, with the taser, and turned and shot at the pursuing officers a second time, and then was shot by the officer who is now charged with murder. Now, I maintain something, and this is something we have to be critically thinking about. I can't follow. If this had been a white guy, and they tased him, and he stole the taser and whatever, and was shot, you would not even know it happened. Local newspapers in Atlanta would have written it up, but it would have been a simple little few paragraphs, couple of column inches, not much. But you know it happened because we're in the middle of a new paradigm with respect to race relations in the United States. We had the situation with George Floyd killed in Minneapolis. And ever since then, any police officer encounter with a black is going to make national news, no matter what the outcome. Now, let's be absolutely clear. There is no question that George Floyd was killed by a police officer without justification. There was no question about it. That is murder. That is unequivocally murder. And he will be convicted, and he's sent to prison for a long time. The situation in Atlanta over the weekend involving Rayshard Brooks is not the same thing. It isn't clear cut, not at all. There is a very large prima facie case for self-defense. And the prosecutor, who is, by the way, up for re-election and is apparently in a battle for his political life in the process, I think overcharged in the case, and basically has placed himself in a very, very precarious position, because here's what could happen. Think about this. He charged him with second-degree murder. If indeed he cannot meet the standard beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certitude about first-degree murder, they're this police officer. And if they acquit this police officer, then what are we going to be in store for? Think about this. He overcharged. I don't think there's evidence enough to support a murder charge here. I don't even think there's evidence enough to support a manslaughter charge in this particular case. And I think, however, that this is going to be lumped in as the absolute moral equivalent of the George Floyd homicide in Minneapolis. And from a public relations standpoint, the court of public opinion is going to see them as one and the same, arising from the same motivations and everything. Critical thinkers know there's a problem with this. Critical thinkers know that the facts are not clear-cut as they were in the Minneapolis killing. Critical thinkers know that there's some serious reason to doubt whether or not this had anything to do with race, to seriously doubt whether or not this had anything to do with a wanton, willful disregard for this individual's life, but rather the fact that he was being shot at while actively pursuing a felon, a person who had already committed a felon, resisting arrest and assault of police officers, both of those felons, and he's going after him, and then the person turns with a taser and fires it at him, and he returns gunfire, and the fellow dies. Now, they're making a big deal about the fact that he was shot in the back twice. That sounds like it was just a person who was fleeing and the cop decided to bring him down fatally. But the reality of it is, if you look at the tape, you'll see that the officer returned fire while he was being fired upon. The man turned to continue to run and was struck. So the fact that he was struck in the back a critical thinker will be able to tell you, doesn't mean a thing. It's a talking point that looks terribly important, but is not. The jury will not find that to be a critical issue at all in the end. I think that this is a bad charge, a mistake, seriously. Lord knows there's enough problems with respect to police officers and felons who are brutalized in the streets. We see that happen on occasion, not very often at all, in fact, infinitesimally small numbers does that happen. And the fact that they're black or white really isn't about a systemic kind of racism. More white fleeing felons, more white persons are in fact fatally injured by police than are black people injured by police. And nobody raises any questions about those kinds of issues. If you're going to be a critical thinker, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to be a critical thinker. I'm asking you to assess some of this stuff without all the hype, without all the politicization, without all of the efforts to try to convince you that it's a Republican, a Democrat, a left, or right thing. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to take a look at the facts and ask yourself, is there some possibility that we're not getting it straight out there from the press? And the answer is yes, of course, because if you're a critical thinker, you also already know that the press has an agenda to advance. And this is part of advancing that agenda. This is not the same as George Floyd, not the same at all. The Brooks case is a lot more complicated, and there's been a rush to judgment here, I think. We'll find out, because if indeed it goes to trial, there's going to be a very high burden of proof in this situation, and that high burden of proof is going to be difficult for the prosecutor in Fulton County to be able to pull it off. And when he doesn't, if the jury in fact acquits the police officer, all hell will break loose, because they'll say justice wasn't done. But indeed, a critical thinker knows justice will have been done. It just isn't what the court of public opinion prefers after being whipped up by a media that wants to put an end to this guy, wants to put an end to police. Just as a side note on the putting an end to police, you notice that there's been an awful lot of yap these days about defunding the police or getting rid of them. And one of the demands Black Lives Matter has is to get rid of the police. Do you really want to have your community without a law enforcement presence entirely? You don't even have to be a critical thinker to know that that's playing with fire. You really want to do that? You really think that the police officers who serve you and risk their lives every day should be completely eliminated? What would you replace it with? What would you have? Who are you going to call when somebody's breaking into your house? Who are you going to call when somebody's torching your business? What are you going to do if the police officers won't respond because they don't even exist anymore? I mean, really? Right now, 7 out of 10 Americans have made it clear in all the polls that this is not something that they want to buy into at all. This is ridiculous. They know it. Even individuals who aren't all that bright can see the writing on the wall in this one. But the bottom line is that critical thinkers know full well that there isn't anything that you can replace a police force with that will be able to handle what a police force handles on a day-to-day basis. And if you're going to insist upon doing that, you are asking for total chaos in this country. And it won't be long before that total chaos costs you dearly in terms of your health, your safety, your property. So you need to ask yourself, do you really want to do this? Now, there are a number of groups trying to push candidate Joe Biden into buying into the elimination, the defunding of police. A number of organizations wanting to do that. So far, he's resisted, and they are planning on punishing him for that. That would be a mistake. Certainly, if you want to dethrone Trump and put a Democrat in the White House, don't let that Democrat, whoever it is, tell you that they're in favor of defunding the police and eliminating police forces in America's urban areas or anywhere else, because the American public is not going to elect anybody with that kind of a mindset. It's not going to happen. Simply not. People want protection. They want to know that they're safe. Property values rely upon that. People who have investments in their homes and in their businesses and in rentals they may have and whatever do not want to know that the value is basically at the mercy of some gangs that might roam through the neighborhood and destroy things. They want to know that there's a force against that, and there has been traditionally. But if you eliminate the police, that's what you're asking for. Here's how you reach us if you want to chat with us. There's a code that you need, and Vinny will give it to you. Here's how you do this. Just simply dial up Vinny at Spokane talksmedia.com, and he'll give you an access code, and then you can join me on the conversation. We can talk about any of these topics that we're speaking about right now. Let's take a little time out, and we'll be right back with more on Four Critical Thinkers.
National Barricade and Sign Company is a well-established company founded in 1957. National Barricade has become a well-known business in the Spokane Valley for more than 50 years. Over the years, we have built long-lasting relationships with many cities, counties, and their departments of transportation. Customers come to us because they know they're going to get the best quality service at the best possible price. National Barricade prides itself on getting the job done in a timely manner. We know that contractors must have certain items in a timely fashion to get their job done, and if we don't have it, we will get it. We guarantee fast service no matter how long it takes.
Welcome back to Four Critical Thinkers. You can join us, of course, if you would like to. You've got questions or comments, we're always welcoming those. Some of you folks will be seeing this later than the live presentation that we're doing at this very moment. But still, you will have had an opportunity to center yourself around some of the issues and some of the stories that we are talking about. Let's move on to the Trump rally, which is set for Tulsa, Oklahoma, on Saturday night, the 20th of June, coming up just a couple of days from this broadcast. Over 1 million people have attempted to get tickets to get into this. Over 1 million people. Now that's a pretty significant number. And of that of the million people, only 20,000 of them are going to be able to get into this meeting hall, this arena in Tulsa. And of course, there's been all kinds of noise made about, well, the president doesn't care about anybody getting coronavirus. He doesn't care about any of those folks. He's gonna make it difficult for these individuals to stay safe and all that sort of thing. Now they're going to take temperatures. They're going to pass out masks. They're going to have hand sanitizers in there, and they're going to encourage social distancing to the degree that it's possible to do that. But the left is going crazy. Well, the president's more interested in getting reelected than he is in saving people's lives, right? This is the same left, by the way. This is what I'm talking about, or throwing the wraps off of this whole business about COVID-19. this same group of individuals seem to have no problem whatsoever with allowing street demonstrations with 10, 15, 20,000 people. They had no problem with riots in the streets. None of that. They never said anything about, gee, these folks are going to get, exposed to the coronavirus. A whole lot of people are going to get sick. They shouldn't do this. This is wrong. Not, in fact, the scientists themselves came to the conclusion that this was such a noble cause that it sort of was exempted from their concerns about coronavirus. Can't have it both ways. Critical thinkers know that coronavirus apparently knows no limitations with respect to your political beliefs or those things that advance your agenda or don't advance your agenda. That's not what it matters. It's simply about connecting with other individuals and possibly exposing them to the disease. Yes, that's what it's about. So how come it's a problem for a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but it isn't a problem for a riot in downtown Minneapolis? See the hypocrisy clearly. Critical thinkers understand that, look, either it is this or it is that, but it can't be both. The facts are the facts. You're entitled to your opinion, of course, always entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own set of facts. So if indeed not practicing social distancing, not wearing a mask, is something that we're supposed to stop and think, you don't want to do this right now, the situation's too dangerous, then why is it that they're okay with this? What it amounts to is the science is no longer credible. It's just simply no longer credible. It's about politicizing the whole thing. It is about left and right. It is about advancing agendas. It is about the bias of the press. Trump's a bad guy for holding a rally in Tulsa. Antifas are good guys for holding riots and looting in Seattle. Really? That's what it comes down to, huh? This virus is all about whether or not you're looting for a good cause or politicking to be reelected president. If indeed it comes down to that, then it's a ridiculous discussion in the first place, and I suggest you are already past that. We're in the ridiculous zone, and it's time to simply just lift the whole exemption and understand that nobody's going to buy what you're selling anymore. The scientists have no more credibility any longer. The models all failed. It's ridiculous. But that's what we live with. We live with the politicization of things, and we live with propaganda, not truth. And we live with a cooperative media that's more interested in destroying the presidency of Donald Trump than they are in telling you the truth about anything, including anything that would be of critical nature to your own health, important to your own health. They'll distort, and they have, and they do. Critical thinkers are looking at all this when they see it in the headlines, when they see it on the television news programs, and they're asking themselves, wait a minute, what? Really? How can that be? But non-critical thinkers are saying, oh yeah, Trump bad, held rally. Antifa good, held a riot. Come on. Really? Are you that shallow? Are you really that shallow? You can't possibly be. Lastly, for this presentation, I want to talk about polls. We read a lot now. We're getting, 4.5 months until the election in November. Reading an awful lot about political polls and public opinion polls and such. And most of them are showing that even though he's been holed up in his basement and every time he comes out he gaffes himself into what would be just horribly embarrassing for most Americans, Joe Biden apparently leads Donald Trump in the preference polls for president. All right, that may be true, that may not be true. What makes it true? Well, because the people say so. What do you know about polls? Everybody has an opinion. Opinions are like noses. Everybody's got one. So we have to find out whether or not the opinions that are being expressed are opinions that are actually worth listening to. Anybody over the age of 18 in the United States is considered an adult, and you can ask them what they're going to do about the election come November. You can ask them what their opinion is about this, that, or the other thing, and they'll offer it to you. If you're talking about a motivated voter, however, you're going to have to determine whether or not that person actually has participated in the process. This last poll that came out the other day, I think it was CNN that put it out, showed Joe Biden 14 points ahead of Donald Trump. And I have for many, many, many years broken down polls to take a look at how they arrived at the conclusions they arrived at, and I broke this one down too. Here's what I found out. 38%, almost 4 in 10 of the individuals who were polled were 18 plus adults who weren't even registered to vote. Now the headlines, screaming headlines, and the blasting discovery and excitement on television, on CNN, did not share that with you. They didn't tell you that. 38% were 18 plus adults but had not been registered to vote. Now, there are adults who are registered to vote. There are adults who are registered to vote who actually do vote. Just because you're registered doesn't mean that you're going to cast a ballot. And there are more credible respondents to polls as you graduate closer to the actual active voter category, as opposed to simply, I meet the category or the criteria of being 18 years of age. I want you to be a critical thinker about polls, because you're going to see a lot of them in the future. So an individual who is registered to vote but has not actually ever cast a ballot isn't a very useful respondent to a poll. That person shows a propensity not to vote even though they're registered. So the fact that they're registered might be a little bit better than not being registered, but it isn't as good as somebody who is registered and who has voted 4 out of the last 5 elections. That's a motivated voter. And in this particular CNN poll, there were only a handful of those. And then you take a look at the skew being the persons who were asked the questions. How many of them were Republican? How many of them were Democrat? How many of them were independent? How many of them were basically undecided? And what you find out is they overloaded the poll with persons, many of whom, 38% of which had never been registered to vote, who saw themselves as Democrats, 26% as Republicans. Whoops, that's not exactly a balanced poll, is it? Independents only 7%, and I don't knows were the rest. So you have to ask yourself, how credible was that poll? In terms of its skew, in terms of the persons who responded, how credible was it? Where were the questions asked? Were the questions asked in states that are heavily anti-Trump or heavily pro-Biden and always have been? Or was there a mix in terms of the geographic location so that we're getting an idea, a spectrum of ideas as opposed to a concentration of ideas? Well, I checked that out too. Watch the zip codes where these individuals were responding from, and most of them were in blue states, blue cities, who don't vote Republican anyway. Well, that's a problem. Isn't that a problem? Sure it is. And then I looked at the questions themselves. What are you asking these people to respond to? And when I looked at the questions, I found out that this is what is referred to as a push poll. The questions are crafted in such a way that the response is pretty much predictable, almost a given. People do this all the time. Now, they don't tell you about the methodology unless you look it up. They're not going to tell you about the skew flaws unless you look it up. They're not going to tell you about the credibility of the respondents in terms of whether or not they're really serious voters or not unless you look it up. They're just going to give you the results they came up with and suggest that this is startling news, important news. You need to know about it. And that's what's been going on the last couple of months with respect to polling. And unfortunately, if 2016 is any indication, we're going to see much, much more of this in the next few months through the summer months and into the fall. Polling isn't necessarily what you think it is. Oh, the polls say this or the polls say that. Polling is at first and foremost in any event merely a snapshot, but if it is a snapshot of something that's distorted to the degree that you can't recognize it for its reality, it's not very useful for anything. So I'm asking you to be a critical thinker, and I'm asking you to ask yourself when you see these polls, who do they ask the questions of? Not just how many males or females were there, but what's the story behind these folks who are responding? They'll tell you, well, there's a plus or minus 3.5 discrepancy in this, right? In other words, we could be maybe 3% wrong. Even that is bogus. Anybody who's ever taken statistics in college knows full well that you can't gauge a percentage of deficiency in a poll unless you know what the details are. And if you don't know what they are, then they'll probably, 3.5, that's pretty standard, right? That's pretty, margin of error is 3.5. Really? Really? And how did you come up with that? How'd you calculate that? I just gave you the background on that one particular CNN poll. How do they calculate that? How do they come to that conclusion? Well, let me suggest, I could save you a little bit of footwork. This one was bogus. Bogus as a $3 bill. But did they ever bother to take it down? Did they ever bother to be honest about the way they did the polling? No. Will they do it again? Oh, absolutely. Sure they will. Sure they will. There are serious methodology flaws in polling processes unless the public makes them honest. But here's our problem, and this is why we don't. We view the media these days the same way we root for our favorite pro football team. We like certain individuals to tell us what's happening the way they think we want it told. That's who we tune into. We don't kick all four tires. We trust the dealership and we buy sight unseen, basically. The reality of it is that unless you kick all four tires and walk around the whole thing and get an understanding of what it is from a variety of perspectives, you don't really have the truth at all. Even if there is a genuine and bona fide effort to give you the truth on the part of the media outlet, you don't have the truth because they don't have the truth. And if they have an agenda to advance, then clearly truth isn't the first and most important part of that journalistic output. Advantage is. Agenda is. Advancing the agenda is. How do you know? Well, you got to be skeptical. You've got to be skeptical. Even if it's true, you still got to be skeptical until such time as you can satisfy yourself as a critical thinker that it is true. But just taking it at face value anymore, especially when the press is no longer hiding the fact that not only are they biased, but they have an agenda to advance and they think they're being noble about trying to bring a president down. If that's the process, they're certainly not going to do anything that gets in the way of that agenda, including telling the truth. They're not going to do that. They'll leave things out. They'll overemphasize certain things, underemphasize certain things, even embellish, and they do it almost every day. It's really difficult to find the truth these days in the media, in this media atmosphere we find ourselves in. Everybody has an axe to grind. We expect that of politicians. We expect that of people who have, a economic interest in the outcome, folks that are trying to sell you products or services, things of that nature. But if we're going to make a decision as an informed voter, then we need to actually be informed. We need to have access to the truth. We need to have the ability to analyze things and come to conclusions that are intellectually supportable rather than just the ideological things that we like the most or dislike the most and then choose to accept or reject based on that. Now, this is sort of what we call it, a handbook on critical thinking, I suppose, in some of these issues. But we've approached a number of them in this last hour to examine exactly what's going on there. And I've pointed out the fact that there's more there than meets the eye because the person who is informing you has an agenda and is not interested in telling you everything he or she knows when it comes to the media. And you need to look at it yourself. And I mean, even double check me. I've spent a lot of years, 47 of them in the media. I spent a lot of time reviewing a great many media events and a great many of the important things that happened over the last almost 5 decades in this part of the country. And one of the things I learned is that unless you're willing to invest yourself in a story as a consumer of news and information, unless you're willing to ask questions, unless you're willing to be a critical thinker rather than accept something on face value and verify what you're being told, then you are pliable. And most Americans, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, are profoundly ignorant about realities and accept what makes them feel good as opposed to what truly is. In the famous song "The Boxer" by Simon and Garfunkel, there is a lyric that says, "Still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest." Critical thinkers don't do that. They don't disregard anything. In fact, even if they believe it's true, even if they are pretty sure it's true, they'll still say, it's got to be verified before I buy in. If more Americans would do that, and I don't have a lot of faith that they would because they haven't been taught how to do that, the educational system has basically gone the opposite direction and made people essentially ignorant as a matter of lifelong fact. And they haven't taught them how to be critical thinkers, but you can teach yourself. And that's what I'm hoping you'll do if you watch this program. You'll look at these various things that we try to cover. And I don't cover them with entirety. I simply point out some things that maybe you ought to look at to satisfy yourself about the truth and veracity of these sorts of things before you just buy in. If we did that, that portion of Capitol Hill would not be occupied tonight. Black Lives Matter would not have the power they currently have, but people would still believe that Black Lives Matter. We would have better leadership in our cities and our country. We would understand a whole lot more of what was going on with this COVID-19, and we would be far, far better prepared to do the right thing and to back the right causes and to reject the wrong propagandas that we come across every day. Are we up to it? Hope so. Can't save this country unless we are. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and this is For Critical Thinkers. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this edition of For Critical Thinkers. Join Mike Fitzsimmons twice each month for a chance to share your views about important issues that affect our lives. Stay tuned to Spokane Talks for our next scheduled session.